Welcome to Own Your Heart Health. I'm Dr. Regina Druz, your holistic cardiologist. This week, we will dive into common heart health concerns, uncovering root causes, and unpacking scientific discoveries and controversies. The information provided does not constitute medical advice. Please contact your healthcare practitioner before making any changes that may impact your health. Hi, everyone. This is another Friday fun day. I do a lot of my recordings, or a lot of my guests come and visit me on a Friday. And today I am excited to actually have someone who is local. Now, if you don't know, maybe you do know, I'm located in New York on Long Island, and so is my guest. And Miss Mindy Gorman-Plutzer is actually a powerhouse when it comes to nutrition, especially nutrition for women who are in menopause and perimenopause. And she's also a certified health coach. So she kind of brings the lifestyle lens to management of chronic diseases, something that unfortunately is often missed from at least the traditional medical encounters. Mindy, welcome to Own Your Heart Health.
Oh, thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here. May I call you Regina?
Always. So I'm going to ask you a question that I ask everyone here. How did you get to grow up to be a certified health coach, and specifically to focus on this issue of, midlife transformation, what it means for women, and, provide us with these new insights into that process and how women can actually manage and even thrive through that part of their life?
It's such a wonderful, wonderful question. Really is. And it's one that's very close to my heart, because the work that I do now with women really evolved out of the work that I needed to do on myself. So let me tell you a story. I spent most of my adult life fearing what food would do to me. I struggled with various forms of eating disorders, disordered eating, and truly struggled with my value, my self-worth, and thinking that it was all tied to the size of my body. In 2004, at 49 years old, I lost my husband to cancer. We had had a golden life. We had raised two fabulous daughters. We had the country club membership. We had fabulous friendships. We had community involvement. And here I was left. My husband had been my rock. He was my troubleshooter. He handled all the finances in our life. And I found myself to be basically physically, emotionally, and psychologically bankrupt. However, I always had an interest in nutrition. As many women who suffer from eating disorders and disorders do. Many of us could have written the best diet books ever. So having this inclination, in my mid-50s, I read a story about a woman who changed her life and her passion by enrolling in the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, IIN, that many health coaches are coming out of today. I enrolled right away, and that put me on a trajectory of understanding what transformational coaching was about, how nutrition is more about what our bodies do with the food we eat rather than the importance of what we're eating, which really speaks to the functional piece, which I'll get to in a minute. That training took me to the Institute for the Psychology of Eating, where I studied with Mark David and became a certified eating psychology coach. And that training was all about who we are as eaters. So, and to make it brief, when I say who we are as eaters, I mean why we eat, how we eat, when we eat, has a huge impact on what we eat. Through that training, I was introduced to full body systems, functional medicine, nutrition training with Andrea Nakayama. I completed that coursework, and from there went on to her advanced training certification and became a functional nutrition and lifestyle practitioner.
Amazing. So amazing story that,
And say in my 50s, right? In
right.
fact, I completed the training for the FNLP, the Functional Nutritional Lifestyle Practitioner, in 2018. So I was 53 years old. Yeah, 53 years old.
Well, the best things happen in that second phase, right? The second phase is the
No,
phase when you can actually spread your wings and begin to do certain things that maybe you were not able to do when you were younger.
right, exactly. And maybe I was 63. I can't do math, but I can. It's funny because part of my story is I say that I could calculate every calorie that I was ingesting, but I couldn't balance a checkbook. That's another story. So let me finish with this. So all this training did for me was it helped me to see that the conventional nutritional protocols not for eating disorders was not serving the population.
Mm.
It was not. All Foods Fit was not addressing gut health. It was not addressing chronic disease. It was not addressing mental well-being. All it basically was doing was feeding the anxiety of the people who were being forced to commit to eating all foods when, after years of abusing their health, abusing their digestive systems, their bodies couldn't handle what they were being asked to eat. So I created my own program. I created a framework, the Freedom Promise, an acronym for freedom, find your enough, rest and digest, eat when you're hungry, stop when you're not, eat mindfully, do something every day to make your body feel alive, only eat whole foods as often as you can, and make sure you surround yourself with what truly nourishes.
Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Regina here. I know there are contradictory opinions about nutrition for heart health and longevity. Discussion often gets heated and confusing. There are those who push for low fat, low cholesterol. Then there are fans of a ketogenic diet. There are many anti-meat voices as well, suggesting vegan or vegetarian style of eating. With all the chatter out there on what and how to eat, my team and I decided to create a tool for patients, medical professionals to clear the clutter. It is called Holistic Heart University, and it provides on-demand courses, nutrition and lifestyle resources, information on supplements to make it easier to understand how to make healthy choices for your heart. I'm especially proud of our open office hours for program patients and the Q&A feature where you get to ask your individual questions and put us in the hot seat. Head out to the show notes for the link and use my special promo code to get a huge 20% off on our annual health and wellness subscription. The code is owner20, and I'll see you in the office hours. First of all, there is so much to unpack here. I have to tell you that I recently started watching a show. I just happened on it by accident. It's on Apple TV. I have no relationship to Apple TV or to the show, but the show is actually called Physical. And it's with Rose Burns. And Rose Burns is the main female character in the show and who happens to be an absolutely brilliant character, caring and, sort of just has so much potential, but this potential is repressed. And so we learned early on in the show that Rose had trauma. She had a very traumatic experience and developed a very serious eating disorder. And at one point, her disorder was bulimia. She begins to realize that, her eating disorder is about control because she lacks control in the other areas of her life. So it sort of, became kind of, profound. And we see her kind of really overcome a lot of it as she regains control in the other areas of her life. But, it started me thinking is that, and I see a lot of female patients myself, and obviously I'm a middle-aged woman, and I know, a lot of women, they do those 3 O's that I always tell them not to do, right? They over restrict. Usually that comes to carbohydrates. They overstress. Usually this is what you're mentioning, sort of, counting every single calorie. And they sort of oversimplify things in many ways, right? They're kind of, label foods as good are bad or carbs are bad and protein and fats are good. So tell me more about this program that you're developing. It's sort of like where you develop the core pillars, how, what exactly, where does one start, right? Like if whether it's an eating disorder or a person with chronic conditions, and nutrition is such a foundational piece of
Mhm.
trying to overcome chronic conditions.
Yeah.
Where does one start?
One starts with recognizing their why,
Okay.
right? I say, now my program has evolved. And as I've been working now primarily with women in midlife and beyond, um, we need to look at the big picture differently.
Hmm.
So we always start with recognizing, right? It's the 4 R's, right? Recognize, reject, reclaim, and radically accept. So what I mean by that, by your why, is not so much your why around what you want to achieve. That's very important, of course. But the why is more related to why these issues are there, why the behaviors came up in the
Hmm.
first place. And what I like to tell my women, and I work with the most intelligent, fabulous women who are so willing to share their journey and walk this path with me, that their behaviors are not the problem. Their behaviors started out as a solution
Hmm.
because something in their inner self doesn't feel safe. A woman only wants to change her body because she doesn't feel safe in it.
And that was
Now,
actually that show, Physical. This is very well portrayed by the creators of the show. Is that
mhm,
her lack of safety, her lack of control, is that impetus, behind the eating disorder that she has.
exactly. And on the most basic, common issue. I'm not talking about deep-seated trauma. I'm not talking about women who have suffered sexual trauma, and therefore that's why they don't feel safe in their bodies. That's a discussion for a whole nother time. But when we are wrapped around a culture that is telling us that we can't be trusted to know what's right for our bodies, when we are being basically hijacked by diet culture, by an industry that is profiting from our self-doubt, that is assigning points to food, red light and green lighting foods, taking away what should be uh, a basic instinct about what we should eat because we're connected to the wisdom of our bodies. That's what diet culture has hijacked us from, right? We've been taught that our worth is conditional, that we must earn our place at the table through relentless self-improvement, that we have to modify our bodies, and constantly be in the pursuit of an impossible standard,
That is so true.
right? But the truth is we were all born worthy. Our value is not a variable. We've been sold the lie that happiness lies on the other side of smaller,
Hmm.
right? That peace waits for us on the other side of a certain number or a specific clothing size.
Hmm.
And truthfully, as a functional practitioner, and I know you are as well, this is a very, very tenuous time for practitioners like us because of everything that's out, all the hacks now that are out there, right? Test
Okay.
don't guess has gotten out of hand.
Right.
What's missing is practitioners learning to listen, to ask the right questions, to listen to the answers, to intuit what is not being said before we send our clients for another test.
Hmm.
Because again, everything is being asked of them to reach outside of themselves for the answers, when the answers are within them anyway, when the answers are in us all along.
That, this is a great point, because I actually, just a couple of days ago, I was thinking of writing a blog for Substack, and I finally wrote it, and it's called ChatGPT and poop. And the reason why it's called
I like
ChatGPT and poop is because I literally had a patient who sent me a message, and I reproduced the message in the blog, who said, Dr. Druz, my stool results are back. And, this is a patient with serious cardiac issues and a lot of other issues. So obviously, as an integrative cardiologist, we look comprehensively through a very, deep metabolic profiling lens. And of course, microbiome is such a impactful force in chronic diseases, especially cardiovascular, cardiometabolic diseases. And even for older persons, obviously, there is a lot of longevity implications from microbiome and so on and so forth. So this patient, who's a lovely patient, I love working with him, he literally sent me this little snippet, and he said, this is what ChatGPT told me about my stool result. And he kind of reproduced it. He copy and pasted. And he, asked, what do you think? Can we discuss this? And I realized, because he wasn't the first one, so I had obviously additional patient messages. They were not about, stool testing. They were about something else. And it became obvious to me that patients they're feeding that blood work. And that speaks to your statement about over testing. They're feeding the results into the chat bots, and they're hoping to get some sort of an insight or some sort of a solution. But the problem is that chatbots don't know them as people, so there is no context to it. And without context, it becomes sort of just like a laundry list of information that is even more confusing. And so I called it, obviously generative AI and even availability of tests, direct to consumer testing. These are all radical innovations, right? Because they have changed the process. They have changed the process, not in incremental ways, but they have changed the process in the transformative, disruptive ways, right? You can get your blood work by going to the website and, Quest, LabCorp, us, Holistic Heart Centers, who have Heartwell toolkits. You can get all of it, without going to a doctor. You can, type in your nutrition concerns into ChatGPT or comparable stuff, and it will spit out, your nutritional plan. But the problem with this is, maybe it's a positive thing. We'll call it positive externality. It lowers the barriers. There is more access. But there's a tremendous negative externality, because there is really breakdown in the process that could actually drive meaningful results, right? Health coaches like you, practitioners like myself, we know how to drive those meaningful results based on the information. We're just not crunching the information. So what you're saying, that start with why, is so impactful, sort of. So how do you help your clients sort of dissociate themselves from this result obsessed, the smaller is better, you're only as good as your dress size culture? And I think that's especially true for women. I don't know if you work a lot with male patients, but that seems to be more of a
no.
female
I
problem.
work primarily with women. I help them understand that where they are in their lives is a pivotal moment. Mm-hmm. That now is the time to unburden themselves from the masks that they've been carrying for so long. Mm-hmm. Right. And I just want to go back, what you say about chronic disease and chronic illness and chronic situations is very important to understand that in midlife, women are so used to taking care of others mm-hmm. that a lot of their symptoms have been ignored because they're disconnected from their bodies, and they have the mindset that they need to push mm-hmm. in order to be whatever their perception of perfect is.
The ideal, to achieve the ideal state.
Exactly. And I know that I have a chronic illness myself. I was diagnosed, believe it or not, in 2023 with cystic fibrosis, atypical cystic fibrosis. And at that point, I faced a choice. I could return to the old patterns of fighting my body, which so many of us women in midlife have been trained mm-hmm. to do, trying to control it and punish it for not being perfect. Excuse me. Or I could practice everything I'd learned about radical acceptance. And what's radical acceptance? And this is how I help women reframe their stories. Okay. I help them to, number one, understand their story, right? I help them to identify the parts of their story that no longer work for them while we honor the fact that it is part of their story.
Okay.
I also help them to see that their biography, their story, has become their biology. And I help them to see how their psychology is impacting their physiology and how their physiology is impacting their psychology. So we spend a lot of time on that. We could spend weeks, months on that until we get to the point where we can now bring in some sufficiency where there is deficiency. Mm-hmm. And that is not only nutritionally, but how are they sleeping? How are they moving? How are their relationships? As a functional practitioner, the right side of the functional medicine matrix, right? The
That's
skills,
right.
the life.
Well,
Right?
the foundation, right? The modifiable lifestyle factors, right?
Exactly.
I love that in the functional medicine matrix, it's right there on the bottom because, it's such a powerful place. It's a place of your foundation, and you can't really build any upper floors unless that foundation is solid, so so that sounds very, very interesting. So what is then, so this radical acceptance, how does it change your client's behavior? What actually happens, in terms of, let's say, their relationship with food, or their self-acceptance, or their ability maybe to capitalize on bringing or improving some of these modified lifestyle factors, right?
Right.
If you could give some examples, that would be great.
Okay. All right. So first of all, I recognize the pattern. What I do is I ask them gently to journal, right? To tell me what they're eating, not so I can judge and make changes so much, but so we have information, gather information so they can make that connection between what they're eating and how they feel, not only physically, but emotionally. Mm-hmm. So we're recognizing the pattern. Then we acknowledge without judgment, right? Name what's happening without shame. And always, instead of should, we reframe it to could. So instead of what should I be eating, what could I be eating? Mm-hmm. Right? And radical acceptance is also having compassionate acceptance. Compassionate acceptance for the story, compassionate acceptance for the fact that it is no longer serving me well, and compassionate acceptance for what I need to let go of. I always say that true transformation is less about what we do to change and more about what we let go of in an effort to become the change we want to see, the change we want to put out into the world.
That is so great, because years ago, a colleague of mine said, you need to read a book. And this book was called Inside the Box. And it was a profound book because it was written on the subject of innovation. And it provided sort of an analysis and great examples as to how some of the most impactful inventions, something that you don't even think, was actually invented, but at some point it was. For example, remote control, right? Who questions the existence of a remote control? Probably no one. But at some point, many decades ago, there was no remote control. It was you had to come up to a television set and flip the channels. Mm-hmm. And so the authors of that book, they said that very often people fall into the trap when they try to innovate. They think of adding features in, but one of the most powerful things that you can do is actually something called subtraction, where you take the features away. And so whoever invented the remote control took away that feature from the television set of flipping the channels and gave people an enormous invention by putting remote control into their hands. And so, in my mind, I always try to remind myself that, think of subtraction as something that brings in value, almost like less is more, which is exactly what you're saying, that one of the most powerful techniques is sort of doing this inventory and asking what is holding me back, back and removing things, that are holding you back before you even, try to bring anything new in. Very, very, very interesting. So Mindy, is this what, tell us about Midlife Metamorphosis. I know you have a new book, right?
Yes.
Tell us about all of your books, because I want to read about all of that stuff.
So my first book was The Freedom Promise, and that was published in 2013, and that really laid out my framework of freedom. It was the 7 steps to stop fearing what food would do to you and start embracing what it could do to you. And that book was really very much a memoir. Every chapter started with an anecdotal story of my own insanity. Mm-hmm. And then I went into the psychology of each of the steps. So that book was really based on my eating psychology training and certification. As I explained before, that it wasn't until after that I pursued my education in functional medicine nutrition. So I knew I always wanted to write a second book because I wanted to tie it all in together. I wanted to introduce the functional philosophy.
The lens of functional medicine.
Behind my program. Mm-hmm. So I started to write the second book, and I was kind of stuck. And as time went by and I was halfway through, my practice evolved, as I explained before, and I started seeing that there was a larger trend with this disordered eating behaviors, particularly women in midlife who were not being diagnosed with eating disorders, but they were struggling incredibly with their weight gain, their body image, their self-worth, finding themselves as empty nesters, finding themselves as single women, finding themselves as women who were being overworked and undervalued, women who were looking back at a career that they could have had, but they gave up to raise their family, women whose children had left home but were still very dependent on them. And there were so many issues that were feeding into a woman's relationship with food. It made me realize that this was all about the woman's relationship to herself.
And I'm just going to interrupt you for 1 second, because I think this is so impactful. As you were speaking, I'm thinking to myself, I cannot find a single friend of mine, a single female friend, who is not affected by this. And they're all successful women. And, and yet I cannot think of a single female friend who is not affected to some degree by this line of thinking. And, I certainly, remember my transition sort of in the middle years, and 100% this affected me. Every single thing that you mentioned, it was definitely shaping what was happening with me psychologically, and certainly my relationship with food and even my relationships with people. But it's astounding how pervasive this is, this disordered, eating, this distorted relationship, especially in midlife.
Yes, for so many reasons. I do have one chapter in the book that addresses eating disorders in midlife, but the book is not about eating disorders. The book is about one's relationship to self. The book is about mindset. There are chapters on the gut-brain connection. There are chapters on, mindful eating, because it still respects my initial framework. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right? It still respects finding your enough, feeling your feelings, finding gratitude. That I say, feeling the love, facing your feelings. It's my original chapter, Rest, is now Rest and Digest. And that is the gut-brain connection and how stress impacts so much of who we are, how stress impacts the gut, how stress impacts our hormones, how our hormones impact our stress, how our gut impacts our stress. So there's a lot in there regarding that. There is the chapter on movement, and there's only, believe it or not, one chapter on nutrition, which goes into seriously all the macronutrients, the micronutrients, but attaches how we feel about it and why we feel about it and how we could better serve ourselves by thinking about it in a different way. the energetics of food, right? Have food that, tuber vegetables ground us. Green chlorophyll grows to the sky, makes us feel like we're expansive. All of that is in the book. At the end of every chapter are exercises, strategies, and tools to reinforce everything that was taught in the chapter, journal questions, and the very last chapter of the book is food for thought. Questions geared for group discussion. So my hope is that this book is being used by other practitioners in their groups, suburban book clubs, because as you said, these issues are so pervasive.
Right.
But so the book is about how diet culture has hijacked us, as I talked about before, how it has hijacked a generation of women. And this book is my love letter to every woman who has traded the size of her life for the size of her body. It's my permission slip to expand your presence on this earth. That doesn't mean make your body bigger. It just means expand who you are. Be present. Put your feet on the ground. Take deep breaths. Receive the blessings. Live in a mindset of abundance rather than scarcity. And it's also my legacy to my children, my daughters, my granddaughters, and future generations of women.
Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Regina here. Many of my colleagues and I are noticing patients coming to us with self-ordered blood tests. When this trend started to gain momentum, I thought it would benefit many patients. After all, who doesn't want more access to health testing? However, I see that self-ordered labs often lead to more confusion and frustration for our patients. Patients are coming in with a pile of labs, and sadly, they're not better off for it. This is why we at Holistic Heart Centers have launched Heartwell Toolkits, a curated collection of blood and genetic markers that one can get at home, focused on heart and brain health, gives you all the data you need to make informed and actionable health decisions. The toolkits can be ordered at our shop on holisticheartcenters.com. You can find the link in the show notes. Use the code TESTING10 to get 10% off and free shipping. First of all, I'm so grateful for people like you who have courage to articulate this and to really let the world see the strength of their convictions. Because, I can tell you as a cardiologist, next year I will celebrate 25 years of being a cardiologist, believe it or not. So we will have to, thank you. Well, it's next year, but, we're getting close. But, what was interesting to me in my specialty, of course, is that when I was in training, we didn't really talk about women's cardiac health, right? It wasn't a topic, it was almost 25 years ago. And then over time, we came to realize that women's cardiac health was a much needed topic for discussion, and not just topic for discussion, but a call to action, because the death rates in women were 1 in 3, and they temporarily became 1 in 4. Now they're back to 1 in 3. The cardiac disease death rates actually are higher in women than breast cancer, and yet most women, they go to regular screenings and they're very concerned about breast cancer, but yet it's the cardiac disease that kills most women. And we continue to see situations where women have greater complications after their heart attacks. They have higher mortality after their heart attacks. They have more of these atypical symptoms. And I remember when I first became involved professionally with focus on women's heart health, for American Heart Association, worked with some of my colleagues, we would give a lot of educational presentations. And at some point, people would ask, they would say, well, so should we really send a woman to a cardiologist or have a test every time, there's some sort of a vague symptom going on, right? Because it wasn't the norm to discuss it. And the clinical trials didn't really mandate that there will be sort of equal or equalized participation men versus women. women of reproductive ages were excluded. It's very different now, for the most part. But back then, and now, of course, years later, no one really questions this anymore. We know that not only do we have to focus on women and their health, but women's cardiovascular health and its relationship to hormones. And this is why, I love that you called it midlife metamorphosis, because this midlife metamorphosis is also a place of power, right? You could change the trajectory for that second phase of your life, as long as you understand what's actually shaping it, these are critical opportunities right in front of us, and we can finally have an informed discussion, as opposed to sort of just like pretending it's not even there. So amazing.
Thank you. There's a huge takeaway here. At midlife and beyond, because I am beyond midlife, the cost of conditional self-worth, it becomes unbearable, right? The truth is we're running out of time to waste on self-hatred, right? While women have been waiting to be thin enough, good enough, perfect enough to fully live, life's been happening.
Right.
And our children and grandchildren are watching. Our relationships have been impacted. Our dreams have been deferred. If we don't take charge and empower ourselves, right? Midlife can be our liberation era.
That's personally, I agree with you entirely. And I think also your focus on the impact of stress. I have to tell you that I am absolutely floored by how impactful stress is on cardiovascular disease in particular and on longevity in general. And, when a patient comes to us, if there is one variable that we always want to change or at least understand, is not only the level of perceived stress, but the level of physiological stress that they're under. Because
Yes.
it is connected, and there is something, there is fascinating research. It's actually not new. It's been published in major cardiology journals, specifically Journal of American College of Cardiology by a group from Harvard Medical School, Brigham and Women's Hospital. So it's a very, very solid research. Drs. Libby and Drs. Paul Ridker, they are part of the group that publishes a lot of very innovative research. And they describe this echo phenomenon, which is essentially how perception of stress in a person who have suffered a heart attack mobilizes the immune system components to go to the site where the vessel was injured, obviously, plaque rupture, plaque erosion, infiltrate that site, attempt to repair the plaque, and what the person thinks, the stress, the pain, the confusion literally echoes in their blood vessels. And I thought to myself when I read this research is that, well, this is a specific situation where there is an acute event, but these situations happen to us every single day in life. Maybe they're not just as profound, maybe the scale isn't as grandiose, but even if you're experiencing these smaller fluctuations in adverse stress or even in a good stress, it will echo in your blood vessels. And where women are concerned, there is actually a very specific syndrome, fascinating syndrome. It's literally called the broken heart syndrome, because women, by the ratio of 9 to 1 between women to men, are susceptible to a condition where the heart literally gives out and loses most of its contractile power, and it looks sort of like a balloon. And this type of a balloon, it sort of becomes roundish, and it's comparable to this very sort of interesting vessel for catching octopi that used in Japan, and it's this vessel is called Takotsubo. So this has become known as Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. And what's unique about it is that it is a two-hit hypothesis where for a woman who may be affected by as you mentioned, disordered eating, struggles, trying to fit a certain standard that she's not fitting, chronic diseases. There's an acute event that comes on top of it, whether her own illness or illness in a family or some profound stressor. And that literally breaks her heart. And it's not benign because this is actually, recovery is not guaranteed. Approximately a third of these patients recover and a third stay the same and a third get worse. So it's sort of like a very intriguing syndrome that doesn't really have great ways of being treated, where the primary cause is the intense stress exposure that comes on top of these pre-existing stressors and physiological dysfunction. So this is really an opportunity, I think, for a lot of women to say to themselves, I'm in midlife and I love it, because I'm finally at the point in my life where I can feel the power, where I can change lives of other people, which is exactly
Right.
right what you mentioned. You said, this
Exactly.
this is your
Right.
legacy.
We have something younger women don't have.
That's
The
right.
wisdom to recognize what truly matters. And with help, and sometimes you need support to gain the courage to stop performing for approval, right? We've
Exactly.
earned the right to take up space unapologetically, right?
Exactly.
That's really what midlife, or that's the beauty of midlife, right? We've learned so many lessons throughout all these stages. Let's take those lessons and apply them to who we are now, radically accept where we are, radically accept that every choice we've made, good, bad, and ugly, was the best we could do at the time, and step into ourselves and step out into the world with confidence, grace, and dignity.
That's wonderfully said. And I think the generations that are following us are already different, because I have three children, a son and two daughters, and I see in my daughters, they're still young, young adults in their early 20s. I see in my daughters, a different type of a woman, a woman that is different from who I used to be in my 20s, because I was more of you must do what you're told, you must please people, you must like always strive to be like satisfy everything and everyone and never think about yourself. And my daughters are different women, and I'm very excited to see that they're good people, but they're also, their generation sees it differently, which I think is great. It sees work-life balance and sort of self-actualization very differently from the Gen Xers here. So sometimes, most of the time, it's good. Sometimes I try to needle them and say, hey, you guys, you just don't have the same work ethic that we could do it all. And they say, well, mom, that's not what this generation is about. So very interesting.
Yeah, well, I just hope that midlife metamorphosis allows women to empower themselves enough to model a different way of being human for everyone around them, that they can become the mother and the grandmother who teaches body acceptance through living it, right? The friend who refuses diet talk, the woman who chooses presence over perfection. And then there is a ripple effect, and that ripple effect is profound. This healing becomes healing to the world.
Amazing. So would you say, when should women start reading Midlife Metamorphosis? Or do you feel
Right
like
away.
right? Well, I think my daughters in their 20s are a little
Oh, no,
bit,
no.
that's a little bit too young, but
It's really for women who are in their 40s.
I agree.
I think women who are starting to experience changes in their body, women who, are seeing changes in their bodies, that the methods that they relied on that worked for them in their 20s and 30s aren't working anymore. Yeah, I would say that, women whose hormones are changing, women who realize that it's time to start to think differently.
Right.
The need to shift that mindset of
Right.
who they are, embrace who they are, and think about moving forward and what they can let go of.
Exactly. And I think, this also requires, and unfortunately, this is the burden that we as women have to carry out themselves, because most of the time in traditional medicine, you won't get this advice, right? The traditional medicine would really prescribe medications first and foremost. And, medications sometimes, and actually more than sometimes, are
Mhm.
needed and could be very impactful. But by the same token, it's unfair to patients, especially women, to only be offered medications and not to be offered these more comprehensive, personalized solutions, because through those personalized solutions, they can actually change their trajectory of their disease, trajectory of how they feel, both in their body and in their mind. And there is no way to do it in the traditional medical encounter. And that's where we come in as functional medicine practitioners, because we bring that wisdom and that opportunity to our patients, sort of to co-create this
Mhm.
health improvement or health optimization with our patients. So, Mindy, where can people, women, could find Midlife Metamorphosis? Where is it available for them to?
Midlife Metamorphosis is available, of course, on Amazon, Barnes
Okay.
and Noble, anywhere that books are sold. My podcast, Soul Shift,
Okay.
is available wherever podcasts, you listen to your podcast. It's Soul Shift, where modern science, ancient wisdom, and real life align. And I co-host with two of my brilliant functional medicine nutrition co-hosts. And we
Amazing.
discuss a whole range of topics. Love to have you on as a guest,
Sure.
Regina.
One of these
And
days, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I could be reached at thefreedompromise.com, Mindy at thefreedompromise.com. Very happy to receive emails. And you can find me on Instagram at The Freedom Promise.
So, my dear listeners, Mindy is a powerhouse. Of course, we will have links to all of the things that she just mentioned, her podcast, her book, her email, so that you can reach out and get her advice. This was amazing. Who knew that I had such a rare find in my own backyard here on Long Island? Thank you, Mindy, for being a guest on Own Your Heart Health.
Thank you so very much. Truly my pleasure.
Hi to all professionals listening to us today. If you're thinking of launching a cardiometabolic or integrative cardiology program in your practice, we can help. At the Holistic Heart Centers, we help docs in practice to expand into hybrid or concierge services. Head out to the show notes and click on the application link. Your intro call is entirely free. Ready to schedule a practice review? Use code DOC10 for 10% off our Practice Power Hour 16 minutes coaching session. The link is in the show notes. Thank you for tuning in to Own Your Heart Health with Dr. Regina Druz. This podcast is powered by Holistic Heart Centers. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform. To learn more about our services, visit holisticheartcenters.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel. The link is in the show notes. See you next week.